I should have gotten used to it by now. The bright studio lights, the long hours, the impossibly beautiful models draped over sleek furniture, their laughter echoing through the spacious loft where my husband worked. But I hadn't. No matter how much I reassured myself that this was just his job, that his hands touching their skin was purely professional, that his eyes, so focused, so intent, were only searching for the perfect angle, the perfect light. I still felt it. That sick twist in my stomach. That gnawing feeling that I wasn't enough. I used to ask him about his shoots. Used to listen, pretending not to care, as he described the concepts, the outfits, the poses. But lately, he'd stopped telling me anything. Our conversations had shrunk into mere logistics. What's for dinner? When will you be home? Did you pick up the dry cleaning? And his touch had become a stranger to me. I told myself it was just stress. Work fatigue. A rough patch, the kind all marriages go through. But doubt had started growing roots inside me, its vines wrapping tight around my thoughts. Then, today happened. I told him I was going to visit my mother. Watched as he nodded absent-mindedly, checking the time on his phone before grabbing his keys. I kissed him on the cheek, an old habit, one that felt like a ghost of what we used to be, and he barely reacted. As soon as the door shut behind him, I waited. 2 hours. Just long enough for him to be comfortable. Then, I drove to his studio. My heart pounded as I neared the building, the modern glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. His car was parked out front, just like always. I hesitated at the entrance, my fingers trembling over my phone. I called him once. Twice. 3 times. No answer. That was my first clue. My first confirmation that something was wrong. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The studio was dimly lit, the soft glow of photography lamps casting shadows against the walls. A few fabric backdrops hung lazily in the distance, remnants of earlier shoots. The air smelled of perfume, not mine. The faint hum of music vibrated through the floor. And then, I heard it. A soft moan. My entire body turned to ice. No. No, no, no. With slow, reluctant steps, I moved past the equipment racks, my breath shallow. A flash of movement caught my eye, a body pressed against the large leather couch where he often shot his models. A woman's body. And my husband's. Entwined. His hands gripping her bare skin, his lips trailing down her neck. The camera, his beloved camera, lay discarded on the floor beside them, as if even it had been forgotten in the heat of their passion. I felt my breath hitch, a sharp, involuntary sound. A gasp. It was quiet, but not quiet enough. His head snapped up. For the first time in weeks, he looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw it, the thing I had feared most. Not guilt. Not shame. Just annoyance. As if I were the one intruding. As if I had no right to be there. Something inside me cracked, and the sound of it echoed through my entire being. I had caught him. And now, it was my turn to play my part. For a long, stretched-out moment, none of us moved. The model, a tall, willowy brunette with lips that looked like they were permanently stuck in a pout, let out a soft gasp, scrambling for the silk robe draped over the couch. My husband, on the other hand, didn't rush. He didn't fumble for excuses or try to hide what he'd been doing. No. He simply sat back, running a hand through his tousled hair, and stared at me with an expression so infuriatingly blank, I wanted to smash his camera against the wall. A slow, bitter smile curled on my lips. So this is what we've become. You didn't even try to pick up my call, I murmured, my voice eerily calm. What, too busy? His jaw clenched. It's not what it looks like. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh. So what is it, exactly? An avant-garde photography technique? Some new form of inspiration? My eyes flickered to the model, who was now awkwardly holding her robe closed, avoiding my gaze. Or maybe just a private consultation. Silence. That was the thing about my husband. He was a photographer. He lived for moments, for capturing fleeting emotions through his lens. But now, standing in front of me, he had nothing. No words, no defense, just empty air where his excuses should have been. I took a slow step forward. He watched me carefully, probably expecting me to break down. To scream. To cry. To ask why. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I bent down, picked up his camera from the floor, and turned it on. Click. The screen flickered to life, revealing the last photo taken, her. The model. Staring into the lens with bedroom eyes, her lips parted, her blouse slipping off one shoulder. I tilted the camera toward him, my hand steady. "You captured this well," I said coolly. "You always did have an eye for composition." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Put that down." "Or what?" I lifted the camera, angling it at him. "Smile." Click. His brows furrowed. "Stop it, this isn't." Click. I turned the camera to the model. Her face paled. Click. I lowered the camera and met my husband's gaze. "Now you know how it feels," I whispered. "To be on the other side of the lens." His nostrils flared. "Don't be dramatic." I arched an eyebrow. "Dramatic?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was unraveling. I wanted to throw the camera at his head. I wanted to erase every moment I'd spent loving him. "You don't get to tell me how to feel." He exhaled sharply and ran a hand down his face. "Look, let's talk about this at home." "This," he gestured vaguely between us. "This is messy." Messy. The word sliced through me like a blade. Messy was forgetting an anniversary. Messy was leaving dirty dishes in the sink. Messy wasn't betraying your wife in the very place where you built your career. I inhaled, steadying myself. Then, with a quiet resolve, I turned back to the camera. My fingers moved swiftly through the settings, finding the memory card slot. "What are you doing?" he demanded, stepping closer. I pulled out the tiny SD card and held it up between two fingers. "Cleaning up the mess." His eyes darkened. "Give that to me." I smirked. "Why?" "Scared of exposure?" The model let out a nervous cough. I should probably go." My husband shot her an irritated glance, but I turned to her, smiling sweetly. "Yes, you probably should." Without another word, she grabbed her bag and nearly tripped over the couch in her rush to leave. The studio door clicked shut behind her, leaving just the two of us. A thick silence settled between us, filled with a lifetime of memories now tainted. He sighed. "I didn't want this to happen." I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. But it did. A beat of silence. Then, he exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. "So, what now?" I studied him, the man I had trusted, the man I had built a life with. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I didn't want him to hurt the way I was hurting. I wanted him to suffer worse. And I knew exactly how. I slipped the SD card into my pocket and offered him a slow, knowing smile. "Now?" I murmured, stepping closer. "Now, we play a game." His brows knitted together. "What are you talking about?" I reached out, trailing a single finger down his chest, watching as confusion flickered in his eyes. Then, I leaned in, close enough that he could feel my breath against his skin. "Smile for the camera," I whispered. And then, without warning, I snapped the SD card in half. His face contorted in rage. "Are you insane?" But I was already stepping back, walking toward the door, leaving him standing in the ruins of his own betrayal. I didn't need the pictures. I didn't need evidence. Because I wasn't going to destroy him in a way he could prepare for. No. I was going to make sure he never saw it coming. Let the game begin. I didn't cry. Not when I left the studio. Not when I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Not when I stepped into our house, and inhaled the scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. I refused to give him that power. Instead, I planned. Because if my husband thought this would end with me sobbing on the couch, clutching a pint of ice cream while he lived out his little fantasy with that model, he was sorely mistaken. No. He had built his entire career on perfect images, on the art of capturing beauty. Now, I was going to make sure that image shattered. The next morning, I was in full control. My heart had turned into stone overnight, and I welcomed the transformation. My husband strolled into the kitchen like nothing had happened, like we hadn't had a silent war in his studio the day before. He poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter, and finally looked at me. "So, are we going to talk about this?" he asked. I didn't look up from my laptop. Talk about what? His jaw tightened. "Don't play games, Anna." I met his gaze, my expression neutral. "Oh, but you love games. You've been playing one for months, haven't you?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I made a mistake. But I don't want to lose us over this." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Lose us?" I let out a small, amused breath. "Oh, sweetheart. You already did." His eyes darkened. "So what, you're just done?" "Just like that?" I stood up, closing my laptop. "No," I said simply. "Not yet." Confusion flickered across his face, but I didn't give him a chance to ask. Instead, I walked past him, grabbing my keys. "Where are you going?" he demanded. I turned at the door, smiling. "Oh, I have some preparations to make." And with that, I left. Step 1, a work of art. The first part of my plan was simple: make him squirm. I went straight to his studio. Not to make a scene, no, I had bigger things in mind. I walked in like I owned the place, ignoring the assistant who gave me a startled look. "Oh, hey, Anna," she stammered. Is everything okay?" I smiled warmly. "Oh, more than okay. I'm just here to pick up some of my husband's work. He's been meaning to showcase some of his best shots, hasn't he?" She blinked. Yes, I think he mentioned something about that." "Great." I clapped my hands. "I'll just take a look myself." Before she could protest, I waltzed into the back room where he stored his portfolios. My fingers danced over the glossy pages filled with his so-called masterpieces, portraits of models, landscapes, editorials. And then, I found it. A folder labeled Private Clients. I opened it, and my grin widened. Bingo. Inside were intimate, very compromising photos of some of his clients, the kind that would ruin careers if they ever saw the light of day. Not that I planned to release them. No, I wasn't that cruel. But my husband didn't know that. I snapped a few shots of the folder's contents with my phone and neatly put everything back in place. Then, I left a note on his desk. "Your art is breathtaking. Can't wait for the world to see it. Zoxo, Anna." Step 2, a social affair. That evening, I dressed for war. A sleek, black dress. Red lipstick. Hair perfectly styled. The kind of look that said, "I am untouchable." And then, I went to his favorite photography gala. My husband was there, of course, schmoozing with clients, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. Until he saw me. His smile faltered. His grip tightened around his drink. Good. I made sure to talk to everyone, his colleagues, his investors, even a few of his clients. I played the charming, elegant wife, the one they all admired. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. Finally, As I sipped champagne and laughed at a joke from one of the sponsors, he approached. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed under his breath. I turned to him, feigning surprise. "Oh, didn't I tell you? I've decided to be more involved in your world." His jaw clenched. "Anna. Smile, darling," I whispered, brushing a hand over his arm. "People are watching." His fingers curled into a fist. I could tell he wanted to argue, but he couldn't, not here, not in front of the people who funded his projects. Checkmate. Step 3, the final exposure. The next morning, he was waiting for me when I came down for coffee. He didn't look amused. "Anna." His voice was low, controlled. "What are you doing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Drinking coffee?" He slammed a piece of paper on the table. "No. This." I glanced down. An invitation to a gallery opening. His gallery opening. I smiled. "Oh," I pulled some strings. "You're getting a bigger audience than expected." His nostrils flared. "You," he took a breath, gripping the edge of the table. "What did you do?" I leaned in, my smile widening. "I may have suggested that some of your more intimate work be included in the showcase." His face drained of color. "You wouldn't." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "Wouldn't I?" I could see the panic setting in. He knew what I had found. He knew that if certain photos ended up on display, it wouldn't just be his reputation on the line. It would be his clients. His investors. Everything he had built could crumble in an instant. He sucked in a breath, his hands shaking. "Anna, please. You don't have to do this." I tilted my head, studying him. "You know what's funny?" I mused. "All this time, I thought you were the one in control. But now you're the one begging." His throat bobbed. "Just tell me what you want." I set my coffee cup down and met his eyes. "I want you to feel what I felt," I said softly. "I want you to lose something you love." And then, I walked away. The game wasn't over yet. But my next move would be checkmate. He was unraveling. I could see it in the way he barely touched his coffee that morning, in the way his fingers twitched as he held the invitation to his own downfall. Good. Let him squirm. The night of the gallery opening was approaching, and I made sure he knew that every carefully curated detail of his perfect life was about to be exposed. Step 4, a performance to remember. The night of the event, I arrived late on purpose. I wanted him to feel every second of dread, every moment of uncertainty, as he wondered what I had done. When I finally stepped into the gallery, I felt the weight of his stare immediately. He was standing near a group of guests, pretending to listen to a conversation, but his entire body tensed when he saw me. His suit was pristine, his tie perfectly knotted, but there was a stiffness to his posture that betrayed his panic. He was waiting for the bomb to drop. And I was about to let it. I smiled as I moved through the crowd, greeting people warmly. I even kissed the cheek of one of his biggest investors, a man who had always looked at me like I was simply the photographer's wife and nothing more. Not tonight. Tonight, I was something else entirely. I made sure to stand near him when the event's coordinator took the microphone and began welcoming everyone. He glanced at me, his jaw clenched. "What did you do?" he muttered under his breath. I simply smiled. Then the slideshow began. The screen at the front of the gallery flickered to life, showcasing his latest works. Stunning portraits. High-fashion shots. Artistic compositions bathed in perfect lighting. And then, her face appeared. The model. His mistress. I heard the slight intake of breath from the guests. People murmured appreciatively at the photograph. It was tasteful, just a close-up of her face, her lips slightly parted, her eyes hooded. But then came the next image. And the next. Each one getting more intimate. Each one inching closer to the truth. The murmur of appreciation turned into hushed whispers. Someone near me gasped. I turned my head slightly, just in time to see the gallery director exchanging confused looks with the investors. And my husband? He was frozen. His face had gone pale, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He spun toward me, his eyes blazing. What the hell did you do? I took a sip of my champagne, letting the moment stretch. I just thought everyone should appreciate your most intimate work. His nostrils flared. He turned sharply toward the event's coordinator, who was also looking utterly panicked. This wasn't on the list, the man stammered. And that's when it hit my husband. I hadn't done this. Not directly. I had only nudged a few key people. Dropped a few suggestions that his new work deserved a bigger audience. The gallery director himself had chosen which pieces to display. He had unknowingly exposed my husband's affair for me. And now? My husband was standing in the middle of the room, his private sins being broadcasted for all to see. Checkmate. Step 5, the unraveling. He tried to do damage control. I watched as he stormed over to the coordinator, hissing through gritted teeth, demanding that the slideshow be stopped. But the damage was done. People were talking. The investors? Unimpressed. The models? Smirking behind their glasses of wine. His colleagues? Avoiding his gaze, too uncomfortable to say anything. And the mistress? She wasn't here. But I had made sure she'd see it later. Because while my husband scrambled to fix his mess, his biggest humiliation was still to come. I had sent those images to her boyfriend. Oh, yes. She wasn't just a single, carefree woman. She had someone. A long-term partner. A man who had no idea that while she was posing for my husband's camera, she was also falling into his bed. By morning, she would have nowhere to run. Neither of them would. Step 6, the final cut. He came home late. Hours after the gallery disaster, after spending the evening scrambling to repair his reputation. I was already in bed, a book in my hands, when the door slammed shut. I didn't even flinch. He stood there, seething, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. What the hell was that? He spat. I turned a page. Your art. On display. Don't play games with me, Anna, he snapped. You planned this. I finally looked up, meeting his gaze with cool indifference. Oh, sweetheart, I said softly. I didn't have to plan anything. His jaw clenched. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. You don't understand what you've done. I closed my book. Actually, I said, standing up and stepping closer, I know exactly what I've done. He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. You're insane. I smiled. And you're predictable. His eyes darkened. I bet you thought I'd scream. Cry. Throw things, I murmured. I bet you thought I'd beg you to fix this. Silence. But no. I tilted my head. I let you ruin yourself. He took a shaky breath, his hands curling into fists. And what now, Anna? His voice was low, dangerous. You've had your fun. So what now? I let the silence stretch. Let him stew in it. Then I finally whispered the words he wasn't ready for. Now, you leave. He froze. What? I crossed my arms. Pack your things. His chest rose and fell quickly. You don't mean that. Oh, I do. His eyes searched mine, looking for any sign of weakness. He found none. I'll fight you for this house, he warned. I smirked. No, you won't. Because he knew, just as well as I did, that his career was hanging by a thread. And I held the scissors. He had nothing left to bargain with. No reputation. No support. Not even his mistress, who, by now, was dealing with the fallout of her own betrayal. And so, for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Defeat. His lips parted, like he wanted to say something, an apology, an excuse, something. But I didn't care anymore. I had already won. So I stepped past him, walking toward the bedroom door. Before I left, I paused. "Oh," I murmured, turning slightly. "One last thing." His jaw tensed. "What?" I smiled sweetly. "Don't forget your camera." Then I left. And this time, I never looked back. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was sad. Not because I was broken. But because I was waiting. Waiting for the realization to fully settle in his bones. Waiting for the moment he understood. He had lost. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of drawers opening and closing. The soft shuffle of his feet. The muted thud of clothes being thrown into a suitcase. I imagined his hands shaking as he packed. Imagined his mind racing, grasping for something, anything, that would make this feel less real. He was scrambling. And I wanted him to scramble. For once, I was in control. By the time morning arrived, he was still here. Standing in the middle of our room, staring at his half-packed suitcase like it was the symbol of everything he had lost. I slipped out of bed, stretched, and let out a content sigh. "Oh, you're still here?" He stiffened. I strolled past him, pretending not to notice the way his jaw tensed. "You know, if you keep stalling, I might start charging you rent." His eyes snapped to me, dark and unreadable. "You really don't care, do you?" I turned, tilting my head. "Care?" I let the word roll off my tongue like it was something foreign, something I had discarded long ago. He exhaled sharply. "This is a game to you." I smiled. "Oh, no, sweetheart." I leaned in slightly. "This was your game. I just played it better." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I could see it now. The fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what came next. Step 7, his reputation in ruins. I had done more than just expose his affair. I had made sure that the world saw who he truly was. The morning headlines were brutal. Renowned photographer's scandal unfolds at gala. Private client photos leak amidst cheating allegations. Betrayal behind the lens, when art crosses the line. Some articles focused on the affair. Others on the inappropriate nature of his work. Did these women know how intimately their bodies were being photographed? Did they consent to the way he framed them? Suddenly, it wasn't just about cheating. It was about ethics. His female clients, models, actresses, influencers, started pulling away. One by one, they cut ties with him. And without his clients? He had nothing. By noon, he was drowning in angry phone calls. His agent? Furious. His investors? Pulling out. His gallery? Considering dropping his work altogether. And the best part? I never had to lift a finger. I simply gave the world a little nudge. And let his sins do the rest. Step 8, the mistress's downfall. She called him. Of course she did. I was sitting on the couch, sipping my tea, when I heard his phone buzz. He ignored it the first time. The second time. By the third, he cracked. He snatched the phone off the table, pressed it to his ear, and snapped, "What?" I couldn't hear her words, but I could imagine them. "Why is my boyfriend sending me screenshots? Did you seriously let those photos go public? You ruined my life, you bastard." I watched as his expression hardened. His lips parted, as if searching for a way out. There was none. "Look," he muttered, gripping the bridge of his nose, "this is temporary. I can fix this." Fix? Oh, no. Nothing about this was fixable. Her voice rose, shrill, angry. And then, suddenly. Click. She hung up. And the way his shoulders sagged told me everything. She was done with him. And now? He truly had no one. Step 9, a door that never opens again. By the time the afternoon sun stretched across the sky, he was standing at the front door. His suitcase sat beside him. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching him with mild amusement. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. "I never thought you had this in you," he murmured. I smirked. "That's the problem, isn't it?" I took a slow step forward. "You never saw me." "Not really." His throat bobbed. "So that's it?" I nodded toward the door. "That's it." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, finally, he grabbed his suitcase, opened the door, and stepped out. I waited. Waited for him to turn back. Waited for him to say something, anything. He didn't. He walked away. And this time, I knew he wouldn't come back. Step 10, the perfect ending. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine. I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. The house was quiet. Peaceful. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe. No more suspicion. No more cold glances. No more nights wondering if I was enough. Because now, I knew. I had always been enough. He just wasn't worthy of me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages. My friends. My family. People reaching out, offering support, offering congratulations. And then, a new message. From a private number. I frowned. Opened it. A single sentence. "You played your game well. But games have consequences." I stared at the words, my heart hammering. Was it him? Or was it someone else? The glass in my hand felt heavy. Outside, the city hummed. And suddenly, I realized my story wasn't over yet. I spent the next few days in a quiet haze. At first, I relished the peace, the absence of tension, of waiting for the next phone call, the next lie. I'd spent so many years playing the part of the understanding wife that I had forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. Now, with him gone, I could finally breathe again. But that message, the one from the private number, had gnawed at me. I wasn't scared. No. But I was intrigued. Who was watching? Who had the audacity to threaten me? The repercussions. It didn't take long for the repercussions of his actions to hit. By the end of the week, his gallery had been emptied, his works pulled from the walls. The photos that had once graced prestigious collections now felt like nothing but shards of glass, shattered by my hands. The models who once posed for him had turned their backs. His clients, the ones he had treated as mere stepping stones, now realized that they were the true victims of his exploitation. His reputation, once so carefully curated, now lay in tatters. His career? Well, that was gone. A visit from an old friend. I wasn't prepared for it when the doorbell rang. I had just finished a cup of tea and was about to settle in for a quiet evening when I heard it. The knock was firm, authoritative. I opened the door slowly. And there, standing in front of me, was Yakov. The district prosecutor. The man who had helped me expose my husband's betrayal. I hadn't seen him in weeks. Since the night I'd confronted my husband at the studio, I had cut off all contact. I didn't need his help anymore, and besides, I had no intention of getting involved with him. But now? Now, Yakov was standing in front of me with a look on his face that I couldn't quite decipher. "I thought you'd be alone," he said softly. I stepped back, allowing him inside. "I am. What brings you here?" He paused, his gaze moving around the room. "I wanted to make sure you're all right." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm fine." He nodded but didn't seem convinced. I've been keeping an eye on things. He stopped himself, seemingly unsure how to continue. I turned, walking toward the kitchen. I'm not interested in playing games, Yakov. He followed me, his footsteps heavy. I'm not here for games. I didn't respond, instead focusing on the kettle as it whistled on the stove. My mind was racing, trying to piece together why he was here, why he had come to visit now. Then, without warning, he spoke again. I've been following your husband's downfall, he said quietly. And I know you were behind it. I wanted to check on you. To see if you need anything. I turned slowly, narrowing my eyes at him. Anything? Yakov's gaze softened. You've done a lot already. You deserve peace. I shook my head. I don't need your sympathy, Yakov. I'm fine on my own. He met my eyes, his face unreadable. Maybe. But that doesn't mean you're not entitled to some help. You deserve to feel safe now, without worrying about what's next. I crossed my arms. I'm not running from anything. I'm not scared of my husband's consequences. I don't need you to protect me. He took a step closer, and for a moment, his expression softened. I wasn't offering protection. I just wanted you to know that I understand. His words lingered in the air between us. But I wasn't in the mood for any more understanding. I had played the role of the victim for far too long. And now? Now, I was in control. I gave him a smile, tight and without warmth. I appreciate the visit, Yakov, but I don't need anyone's help to keep moving forward. He studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right. But if you change your mind, if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I didn't say anything. Instead, I walked him to the door, and as I closed it behind him, I let out a long breath. One more thing to cross off my list. Step 10, unfinished business. The following days passed in a blur. I kept busy. Too busy to think about the next step. Too busy to dwell on Yakov's visit. But the message still lingered in the back of my mind. The one from the private number. I had no idea who it was, but I didn't care anymore. Not yet. Because the one thing I knew for sure was this: my husband was gone. And the people he had betrayed were now scattered, like pieces of a broken puzzle. That night, just as I was finishing a glass of wine, I received another message. From an unknown number. It was short. You think you've won, but this isn't over. I put the phone down, sipping my wine, a dark smile curling on my lips. No. It wasn't over. But I wasn't done yet, either. I should have been afraid. The messages from the unknown number were growing more frequent, more cryptic. You think you're safe. You're not. Actions have consequences. You took something from me. I'll take something from you. I could have changed my number. Blocked it. Reported it. But I didn't. Instead, I let them come. Because I wanted to know who I was dealing with. And more than that. I wanted them to think I was afraid. Because fear makes people reckless. Unfinished business. I spent the next few days watching. Waiting. Tracking the movements of the people my husband had left in his wake. His former clients, the ones whose trust he had shattered, were moving on, distancing themselves from him as fast as they could. The gallery he had once thrived in? Dropped him completely. His investors? Gone. His mistress? Nowhere to be found. I smirked at the thought. She had disappeared overnight after her boyfriend found out about the affair. From what I'd heard, she had fled the city, ashamed, humiliated, and looking for a place to hide. She had destroyed her life chasing after a man who had never been worth it. How poetic. But there was one loose end left. And I had a sinking feeling it was the one sending the messages. The call that changed everything. It happened late one night, just as I was about to turn in. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown caller. I didn't hesitate. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. Silence. I waited. Then, finally, a voice. You must feel so proud of yourself. The voice was low, distorted, almost mechanical. I smirked. I am, actually. A chuckle. You think you've won. Haven't I? A beat of silence. Then, a soft, dangerous whisper. You're going to regret this. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my mind racing. I knew that voice. Even through the distortion, the tone, the bitterness, the venom dripping from every word. I knew exactly who it was. The mistress returns. I waited until morning before making my next move. I knew she would return eventually. Because the thing about people like her? They never knew when to stay down. She had already lost everything, her relationship, her career, her credibility. And she was looking for someone to blame. I found her in a small, dimly lit cafe on the other side of the city. Sunglasses on, a scarf wrapped around her neck, like she thought she could hide from what she had done. Pathetic. I didn't sit with her right away. I watched. Watched the way her hands trembled around her coffee cup. The way her eyes darted toward the door every few minutes. She was terrified. Good. She should be. After a few minutes, I finally moved. She noticed me instantly. Her entire body stiffened as I slid into the seat across from her. You've been texting me, I said simply. She said nothing. I tilted my head. Or calling, I should say. Distorting your voice doesn't change the fact that I know who you are. Her fingers curled into fists. I leaned in. What do you want, sweetheart? Her lips parted, and for the first time, I saw it. The anger. The resentment. I lost everything because of you, she hissed. I laughed. Laughed. Oh, honey, I purred. You lost everything because you made the wrong choice. Because you fell for a man who didn't give a damn about you. And you hate that I was strong enough to walk away while you got left behind. Her face flushed red. You think this is over, she whispered, her voice shaking. You think you can just walk away from this like nothing happened? I shrugged. That's exactly what I'm doing. Her hands trembled. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You ruined my life. I smiled. No, darling. You ruined your own life. She flinched. I could see it, the war inside her. Part of her wanted to fight. Wanted to lash out, to blame me for everything she had lost. But another part? The part that still held on to shame? That part knew I was right. She had betrayed herself. She had built her future on the whispers of a liar, and when the truth had come out, it had swallowed her whole. I stood up. Don't text me again, I said coolly. Don't call me. Don't threaten me. She looked away. I leaned down, my voice dropping to a whisper. And if you ever think about coming after me again? I smiled. I won't just ruin your reputation. I'll ruin your entire life. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there, shaking, seething, defeated. Just like my husband. The final piece falls into place. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker outside my window. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly free. The game was over. The pieces had fallen. My husband had lost everything. His mistress had been left with nothing. And me? I had won. I had taken back my power, my life, my future. I was untouchable. And the best part? I had done it all without ever laying a finger on them. Their own choices had been their downfall. And now? They would spend the rest of their lives living with it. I smiled, raising my glass to my reflection in the window. To new beginnings, I whispered. And for the first time in a long time. I meant it. For the first time in a long time, my world felt silent. Not empty. Not broken. Just, still. The chaos was over. My husband was gone. His mistress had been silenced. His career lay in ruins, reduced to whispers and scandals among the industry elite. And me? I was finally free. But the thing about silence? It gives you time to think. To reflect. To wonder if, maybe, the game isn't quite over yet. The last goodbye. It had been 2 weeks since I'd thrown my husband out. 2 weeks of blissful, uninterrupted peace. Then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. I knew who it was before I even picked up. I sighed, lifting the phone to my ear. What do you want? Silence. Then, his voice. I need to see you. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. You don't. Anna, please. His voice was wrong. Not the arrogant, smooth-talking man I had once loved. This voice was exhausted, worn down to its last thread. I should have hung up. I should have ignored him. But something inside me, the part that had once believed in us, hesitated. Fine, I murmured. 1 hour. The park. That's all you get. A shell of a man. He was already there when I arrived. Sitting on a bench, staring at nothing, his suit wrinkled, his hair unkempt. I had never seen him like this. It was almost pathetic. He looked up when I approached, and for the first time in weeks, I saw it, remorse. But it was too late for that. Talk, I said, keeping my voice cold. He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching against his knee. I lost my contract with the gallery, he admitted. And my agent dropped me. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds about right. He let out a bitter laugh. You don't even care, do you? I tilted my head. Should I? His jaw clenched. You ruined me, Anna. I sighed, crossing my arms. No. You ruined you. I just let the world see the truth. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. I don't know what to do. I studied him. This man, this once untouchable, self-assured, narcissistic man, was now just a hollow version of himself. And for the first time, I felt nothing for him. No love. No hate. No satisfaction. Just indifference. I shrugged. Not my problem. He flinched. Like he had expected something else, some part of me to still care. But I didn't. Not anymore. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, his lips parted, and he whispered, Do you ever think we could fix this? I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I leaned in slightly, meeting his gaze with an icy smile. You don't fix something that was already broken, I murmured. You throw it away. His breath hitched. And that was it. That was the moment he finally understood. He had lost me. For good. I straightened, turning to leave. Goodbye, darling. And this time? I didn't look back. A new beginning. That night, I celebrated. Not with revenge. Not with another move in the game. Just with myself. A bottle of wine. A book. A long bath in the house that was mine again. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by him. I wasn't waiting for a text. A call. A lie. I was just Anna. And that? That was enough. I had one. Not because I destroyed him. But because I had finally reclaimed myself. And that? That was the most beautiful revenge of all. There was a strange kind of peace in knowing that I had nothing left to fight for. For so long, my life had revolved around him, his work, his needs, his lies. Even after discovering his betrayal, I had been consumed by the need to expose him, to make him suffer the way he had made me suffer. But now? Now, there was only silence. The war was over. And I had won. Loose ends. A week after our final conversation in the park, my lawyer sent me an update. The divorce papers had been finalized. I stared at the email for a long moment, letting the words sink in. It was official. I was free. No more joint accounts. No more splitting expenses. No more reminders of the man who had taken so much from me. With a deep breath, I typed a short reply. Thank you. Proceed with the final filings. Then, I closed my laptop, exhaling slowly. It was done. And yet, a part of me still felt like something was unfinished. Like there was one last move to make. The final message. That night, as I sipped my wine on the balcony, I found myself scrolling through my phone. Through old photos. Old texts. Old memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Then, without thinking, I opened a new message. I typed his number. And I wrote. I hope it was worth it. Then I hit send. A part of me expected no reply. But within minutes, my phone buzzed. I hesitated before opening it. His response was short. It wasn't. I stared at the words, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of everything we had been. The love, the laughter, the quiet nights, the plans for the future, all of it gone, burned to the ground by his choices. I could have responded. Could have told him that I once might have forgiven him. That there was a time when I would have done anything to save us. But that time was long gone. So I deleted the conversation. And for the first time, I let go of the last piece of him. A future without him. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I made coffee. Opened my laptop. Started planning a trip, somewhere new, somewhere untouched by memories of him. For the first time in years, I was thinking about me. Where I wanted to go. What I wanted to do. Who I wanted to be. And it felt good. Because I finally understood something I hadn't before. The best revenge wasn't just ruining him. It was thriving without him. And that? That was exactly what I planned to do. The past had a way of lingering. Even after the divorce was finalized. Even after the messages stopped. Even after I had rid my life of him, completely. Some nights, I would still wake up expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway. Some mornings, I would instinctively reach for my phone, ready to send him a message about something trivial, something only he would understand. But then, reality would sink in. And I would remember. He wasn't mine anymore. And more importantly, I wasn't his. A new life. It took time, but I began rebuilding myself. I traveled, to places we had once talked about visiting together, except now, I went alone. I made new friends, threw myself into new experiences, and rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried beneath years of compromise and sacrifice. I learned how to enjoy my own company. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make me feel whole. I already was. A familiar face. Months passed before I saw him again. I hadn't planned it. I had been walking through the city on a quiet evening, the golden light of sunset painting the streets, when I spotted him sitting alone at a cafe. He looked different. Not in a dramatic way, he was still the man I had once loved. But there was something missing now. The confidence. The certainty. The arrogance that had once made him untouchable. For a moment, I considered walking past him, pretending I hadn't seen him at all. But then, his eyes lifted, and locked onto mine. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I approached. He straightened in his seat, as if unsure whether he should say something first. I spared him the trouble. Hi, I said, my voice steady. His lips parted slightly, as if surprised by my presence, before he finally managed a weak, hey. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything unspoken. Finally, he sighed. You look good. I smiled. I know. He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Of course you do. Another pause. Then, softer this time, he murmured, I'm sorry. And for the first time, I knew he truly meant it. I didn't feel the anger anymore. Or the betrayal. Or the need to hurt him the way he had hurt me. I had already won. So I simply nodded. I know. His eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe. Longing. But it didn't matter anymore. Because I wasn't the same woman who had once begged for his love. I had outgrown him. And I think, in that moment, he finally realized it too. I glanced down at my watch. Well, I said lightly, it was nice seeing you. He blinked, as if not expecting the conversation to end so soon. Yeah. You too. I gave him one last smile, one that held no bitterness, no resentment. Just closure. Then I turned and walked away. And this time, I didn't just leave him behind. I left behind the pain. The anger. The version of myself that had ever needed him. I walked forward. Toward my future. And I never looked back. The end.